I feel like we all have that one person in our lives. Maybe it's a friend or maybe a colleague who just seems, I don't know, effortlessly magnetic.
Oh, absolutely. The kind of person where the second they walk into a room, everyone's attention just gravitates toward them.
Right, exactly. Or even think about like that one specific brand of shoes or that tech gadget that you suddenly feel like you absolutely have to buy.
Even if you can't logically explain why you need it.
Yeah, exactly. And usually when we feel that intense pull toward a person or a product, we think it's just this, natural organic reaction. We think, oh, they're just charismatic, or that's just a really well-designed jacket.
We like to think it's spontaneous.
Right. But what if that feeling of wanting, that intense craving, isn't an accident at all? What if the feeling of desire is actually a highly engineered, meticulously calculated algorithm?
Well, it is a deeply unsettling thought for a lot of people. I mean, we really like to believe that our desires are our own.
Yeah, we're very protective of that.
We fiercely protect the idea that what we want is an authentic expression of our unique individual identity. To suggest otherwise feels like an attack on free will.
It feels like you're being manipulated.
Exactly. But if you look closely at the architecture of human craving, it points to the exact opposite conclusion. It suggests that desire is actually a deeply predictable mechanical process.
And it's rooted in our evolutionary biology.
All right. And more importantly, it's a process that can be mastered, manipulated, and turned into a tangible source of power.
Because if you understand the biological glitch that makes people crave things, you can stop endlessly chasing the world, and instead you can make the world chase you.
Which is a complete paradigm shift.
It really is. And that is the core idea of what we're looking at today. It's this concept from our source material called the law of covetousness.
It's essentially the psychological blueprint for becoming an elusive object of desire.
Yeah, and what is so striking about this framework is how it completely dismantles our modern assumptions about how to connect with people.
Oh, it absolutely flips the current cultural narrative upside down. I mean, we live in a society that preaches constant, unfiltered transparency.
Right, the whole live your truth thing.
Exactly. We are told relentlessly to be ourselves, to share every fleeting emotional state we experience. But the argument here is that this modern obsession with authenticity is very often just intellectual and emotional laziness in disguise.
Wow. Okay, that is a bold claim.
It makes the case that true magnetic connection, whether you were trying to build a business, create lasting art, or navigate romantic relationships, actually requires a highly calculated understanding of human fantasy.
So it requires a degree of artifice.
Yes, it requires strategic absence.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I know the idea that being genuine makes you less desirable is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way.
It definitely will.
So to really grasp this abstract theory of desire, we need to look at a master practitioner. We need to look at someone who figured out these psychological levers and pulled them so effectively that she fundamentally changed global culture.
We are talking about Gabrielle Chanel, who the world would eventually know as Coco Chanel.
Right. And her story is the perfect entry point.
It really is. Not just because of her success, but because of her beginnings. Her life demonstrates that the ability to generate intense desire in others is very often born out of extreme, almost suffocating deprivation.
You really can't understand the psychology she later weaponized without understanding the absolute austerity of her childhood.
No, you really can't. So in 1895, when Gabrielle is just 11 years old, she spent several days sitting by her mother's bedside, watching her slowly die of tuberculosis at the age of 33.
It's just a brutal, deeply traumatic beginning. And they had been living in absolute poverty before that, right? Constantly shuttled between relatives.
Yes, temporary lodgings, constantly on the move. Her father was an itinerant peddler, someone who sold cheap goods on the road, despised any kind of domestic responsibility.
He was essentially a phantom in their lives.
Exactly. The mother was the only stabilizing, comforting force Gabrielle and her siblings had. And then, just days after the mother suffocates from tuberculosis, the father shows up.
And he takes Gabrielle and her two sisters and dumps them at a convent in central France.
He promises to come back and build a life for them, but he never does. That is the last time they ever see him.
So you have an 11-year-old girl grieving her mother, abandoned by her father, suddenly thrust into this incredibly severe, punishing environment.
The convent is housed inside a former medieval monastery. It's run by an order of nuns who take in orphans and enforce the strictest, most unyielding kind of discipline.
We are talking about a life of absolute sensory starvation.
Total starvation. The relics of the monastery are completely sparse. lacking any painting, mirror, or decoration.
And the clothes, right, they were given exactly 2 dresses to wear.
Yes, and the descriptions of these dresses emphasize that they are completely identical and entirely formless. There are absolutely no luxuries. The only music they are permitted to hear is church music.
And the food is just designed for sustenance, not pleasure.
Exceptionally plain.
I mean, imagine what that does to a developing brain. You are in an environment designed to crush individuality. Young Gabrielle is impossibly restless.
But then she finds a psychological escape hatch.
Right, the romance novels.
She discovers a stash of cheap romance novels written by an author named Pierre de Courcelles that had somehow been smuggled into the convent.
And these mass-market novels become her absolute salvation.
They're all variations on the same exaggerated Cinderella story. A young girl, growing up in abject poverty, despised and shunned by everyone, who suddenly gets whisked away into a world of immense wealth and power.
Usually through some magical plot twist.
Right. Now, why does this matter? Because of the contrast. You have to consider the sensory reality she is trapped in versus the vivid world she is reading about.
She loved the endless, obsessive descriptions of the silk dresses the heroines wore, the sprawling palaces.
The opulent chateau. She is wearing a rough, formless uniform in a stark medieval monastery, reading about velvet and diamonds.
And because these luxurious things were explicitly forbidden to her and entirely unattainable, they created an incredibly intense space for fantasy in her mind.
Reading wasn't just a way to pass the time. It was her very first education in the mechanics of covetousness.
She learned firsthand that the human mind desires most intensely that which is kept furthest away from it.
The restriction literally forced her imagination to work overtime. She could feel herself participating in the plot of these novels.
It gave her an overwhelming, almost painful physical desire to make that fictional world her reality.
So she eventually leaves the convent at 18, goes to a boarding school run by nuns to train as a seamstress. But she discovers a new obsession.
The theater.
The theater. She falls in love with the stage, the costumes, the heavy makeup, the applause. It is a world of total transformation where you can dictate your own identity.
She takes a stage name Coco and tries desperately to make it as an actress, a singer, and a dancer in the provincial cafes.
But here is where she hits her first major wall. She has an abundance of charisma and nervous energy, but she quickly realizes she just doesn't have the raw, undeniable talent to achieve the massive theatrical success she craves.
Right. She's a mediocre singer and a passable dancer.
The fantasy of being the beloved star of the stage clashes with the cold reality of her limitations.
Which forces a pivot. And this pivot is what leads her to Etienne Moussin's chateau.
At that time in Belle Epoque, France, many failed actresses transitioned into the role of the courtesan. They became the kept women of immensely wealthy, aristocratic men.
And honestly, it's easy to see the appeal if you are a destitute orphan. I mean, this lifestyle offered enormous, expensive wardrobes, a degree of freedom of movement.
An independence from what was then the suffocating trap of traditional marriage to a despotic husband.
So Etienne Moussin was this young, incredibly wealthy heir who lived a life of total, unapologetic leisure. He had seen Coco performing in a cafe, was charmed by her energy, and invited her to live at his sprawling country chateau.
But arriving at the chateau isn't the Cinderella ending she had fantasized about in the convent. In fact, it creates a new kind of psychological torment.
Because of the hierarchy, right?
Exactly. The chateau is already populated by famous, worldly, stunningly beautiful courtesans from all over Europe. And the class hierarchy within this world is incredibly rigid.
When important aristocratic guests or political figures visit Balsan's estate, Coco and the other women of her lower status are literally ordered to eat with the servants.
They had to hide away in the upper bedrooms. She has finally gained access to the luxury she coveted, but she is a second-class citizen within it.
She's an accessory.
It's a fascinating paradox. She has the horses, the food, the shelter, but she's miserable. And this is where her deep self-analysis and her understanding of power really begins.
She is restless because she realizes that her dreams have always been absurdly out of reach. First, the literal palaces in the novels, then the dream of being the next great stage actress.
And now she looks around and realizes even her current backup dream, being a legendary high-status courtesan, is structurally unattainable for her.
And the reason it's unattainable is physical, isn't it?
Yes. The classic, highly desired courtesans of that era were voluptuous, classically beautiful women. They had curves. They were the embodiment of the Edwardian feminine ideal.
While Coco, on the other hand, was thin, angular and look more like an adolescent boy.
She lacked the physical attributes that define desirability in that specific cultural moment.
It's like she is playing a massively multiplayer video game, and she suddenly realizes her character has completely the wrong stats for the current level.
That's a great way to put it. She can't win the game of being a traditional courtesan because the board is tilted against her.
Now, she is incredibly charming, and she uses that aggressive charm to steal boyfriends from the other women at the chateau.
She openly admits that her greatest thrill was taking a man who was already claimed by someone else, just to prove she could.
But even when she wins the man, or secures her place at the chateau, the feeling is hollow. She realizes that the actual possession of the prize never, ever matches the intense, burning fantasy of coveting it.
That realization that the anticipation is always better than the reality sets the stage for what we can call her grand epiphany of transgression.
And the genius of it is that it happens almost accidentally.
Entirely accidentally. One day, feeling bored, restless, and completely disconnected from the hyper-feminine world of the other courtesans, she wanders into Etienne Balsan's personal dressing room.
And she starts playing around with his clothes.
She creates this entirely new, hybrid, gender-bending outfit. She puts on his stiff, open-collared shirts, his heavy, structured tweed coats, and tops it all off with a man's flat straw boater hat.
I mean, imagine the sheer physical relief of that moment.
Oh, it must have been incredible.
For her entire adult life, she had been forced into suffocating corsets that literally crushed women's rib cages. Massive, constricting gowns that weighed 20 pounds.
And fussy, towering headpieces adorned with dead birds and fruit.
Right. And suddenly, she puts on a man's coat, and she can breathe. She can move her arms. She feels an incredible sense of physical autonomy.
But the real epiphany isn't how she feels in the clothes, it's how the other women react to her.
Exactly. The other courtesans at the chateau start watching her, and the emotion in their eyes isn't mockery.
No, it's unconcealed envy. They're completely captivated by this weird, austere, androgynous style. Balsan himself is entirely charmed by it. He thinks it's a delightful quirk.
He even introduces her to his personal tailor, right?
Yes. Coco has this tailor, custom maker, a boy's riding costume with actual pants jodhpurs. And she teaches herself to ride horses astride, like a man, refusing to ride side saddle, like every other woman in society.
So why does this work? Why doesn't she just look like a bizarre eccentric? Why does putting on men's clothes suddenly make her the most magnetic person at the chateau?
Because she was tapping into a collective, deeply repressed psychological state. She flouted the strict gender roles of the era, and by doing so, she manifested a deep, unspoken desire for freedom that all these other women shared but couldn't articulate.
They were physically and psychologically trapped in those corsets.
They were trapped in their dependence on men. Coco figured out the nature of her own vague longings. She wanted the physical power, the ease, and the unconstricted freedom that men possessed.
And she instinctively realized that if she felt that way, the other women must secretly feel that way too.
It's an incredible shift in perspective. Prior to this exact moment, Coco was always the consumer of desire.
She was the one coveting the romance novel, coveting the stage, coveting the status. She was looking outward, wanting what others had.
But as she strode around the chateau in her custom men's trousers, she suddenly became the object that other people coveted. She became the screen that they projected their own fantasies of liberation onto.
And that is the absolute core mechanism of the law of covetousness. If you want to become magnetic, you have to reverse your perspective.
You have to stop obsessing over what you want and start analyzing the unmet, unarticulated fantasies of your audience. You figure out what they're starved for, and you embody it.
And we see the immediate results. Within weeks, the other courtesans are knocking on her bedroom door, asking to try on her simple straw hats.
The one she decorated with just a single plain ribbon instead of a massive bouquet of fake flowers.
They start wearing these minimalist hats around town, and soon aristocratic women all over the region are demanding to know where they can buy them.
Balsan, seeing the demand, lets her use his Paris apartment to start a small millinery business. The Chanel empire begins.
And it goes from a small hat shop to a global revolution when Arthur Capel enters her life.
Capel is a wealthy, self-made English businessman. He becomes her lover, but more importantly, he recognizes her genius and funds her expansion to a massive shop in the elite seaside town of Deauville.
Now, Deauville is crucial. It is where all the fashionable, wealthy Parisians flee during the summer. It is the ultimate stage for high society people watching.
Coco arrives in Deauville and immediately shocks the locals by swimming in the ocean, which aristocratic women simply did not do because it ruined their pale complexions.
And she does it wearing a bathing suit she designed herself out of cheap jersey fabric.
Her use of jersey fabric is perhaps the most brilliant, practical application of her psychological insight. At the time, jersey was an incredibly cheap industrial material used almost exclusively for men's underwear.
It was considered totally unsuitable for high fashion.
But it had one incredible property. It stretched, it allowed for total ease of movement.
So she would literally take one of Capel's knit sweaters, take a pair of scissors, cut it straight down the front, add some ribbon and buttons, and invent the modern women's cardigan right there on the beach.
She cuts her hair remarkably short, exposing her neck. And she executes a brilliant promotional strategy. She doesn't just put the clothes in the window and wait for buyers. She gives her clothes away, completely free, to young, beautiful, highly socially connected women.
She creates a walking billboard of desire. These women mimic her short haircut, they put on the loose, comfortable jersey dresses, and they go to all the best casino parties in Deauville looking like a unified army of Chanel clones.
They look relaxed, they look modern, and they look completely different from the older women still suffocating in corsets. The visual contrast creates a viral pull.
By the 1920s, she transitions from a rebellious hat maker to one of the leading fashion designers on the planet.
She is taking cheap jersey fabric, the material of men's underwear, and selling dresses made from it for exorbitant astronomical prices.
And the wealthiest, most aristocratic women in Europe are practically fighting each other for the privilege of paying those prices, just so they can buy into the Chanel mystique.
The product itself is cheap. The desire attached to it is priceless.
But because she is Coco Chanel, and because the law of covetousness dictates that the mind is never satisfied, she gets restless again.
Dominating the visual aesthetic of Paris isn't enough. She wants something more ephemeral, a way to reach millions of women instantly, even if they can't afford a couture dress.
And this brings us to the launch of Chanel No. 5. I really want to dig into the mechanics of this because I genuinely think it might be the most brilliant psychological marketing campaign in recorded history.
It absolutely is. Up until that point, major fashion houses did not emphasize or even produce their own perfumes. And the perfumes that did exist in the market were all highly recognizable, natural floral scents.
You smelled like a rose, or you smelled like jasmine, or you smelled like lilac. It was easily categorized by the brain.
Chanel decides to completely invert the paradigm. She instructs her perfumer, Ernest Beau, to create what she calls an abstract bouquet. She explicitly demands a scent that cannot be identified as any single natural flower.
Right, she wanted a perfume that smelled like a woman, not like a rose.
And to achieve that, Ernest Beau used an unprecedented amount of synthetic chemicals called aldehydes. These chemicals gave the perfume a sparkling, almost metallic, clean quality that didn't exist in nature.
Because it was heavily synthetic, it smelled completely novel. And crucially, it reacted differently with the body chemistry of every single person who wore it.
Think about the cognitive load that places on the people around you. When someone smells rose perfume, their brain instantly categorizes it. Ah, rose.
The mystery is solved, the brain moves on.
But an abstract synthetic scent defies categorization. The brain cannot easily place it. It creates a lingering question, a sensory mystery that forces people to lean in, to ask questions, to obsess over what exactly they are experiencing.
It engages the mind's desire to solve a puzzle.
Even the packaging was designed to provoke. Perfumes back then had these absurdly flowery, romantic names, things like Night of Love or Spring Breeze. They came in ornate, heavy crystal bottles covered in flowers and gold.
Chanel looks at that and does the exact opposite. She just slaps her own name on it and adds a cold, clinical number. Chanel No. 5.
She puts it in a sleek, severe, minimalist glass bottle with harsh right angles and her interlocking C's logo. It looks more like a whiskey decanter or a laboratory flask than a woman's perfume.
It was a total rejection of the saccharine, hyperfeminine aesthetic. But the actual launch of the perfume, the rollout strategy, is where she proves her absolute mastery of human psychology.
If a brand launched a major product today, they would blanket the world in advertisements, billboards, and influencer posts. Chanel took out 0 advertisements.
0. Instead, she initiated an entirely subliminal underground campaign.
She started spraying the perfume obsessively all over the dressing rooms and the air in her Paris boutique. The air was thick with this strange synthetic scent.
And when wealthy clients came in and said, "What is that incredible smell? Where can I buy that?" she would feign complete ignorance.
She would look at them blankly and say, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't sell perfume."
Right.
She denied them the object they desired.
And then she escalated the manipulation.
She took completely unlabeled blank bottles of the perfume, and instructed her staff to discreetly slip them into the shopping bags of her absolute wealthiest, most elite clients when they weren't looking.
I mean, it is so manipulative, but it's brilliant. She essentially plants a psychological time bomb in their bags.
These highly connected aristocratic women go home, unpack their dresses, and discover this haunting, unidentifiable scent in a blank bottle. They don't know what it is, they don't know how much it costs, and they don't know how to get more of it.
So what do? They start talking about it. They tell their friends. The word of mouth spreads like wildfire through the upper echelons of Parisian society.
Suddenly, women are flocking to her store, practically begging to buy this phantom perfume that supposedly doesn't exist.
Only after the demand reaches a fever pitch does she reluctantly agree to start discreetly placing it on the shelves.
And it instantly becomes the most successful perfume in the history of the world. Notice the mechanism here. The perfume wasn't made of rare, exotic ingredients imported from the Himalayas. It was a mix of ordinary jasmine, rose, and cheap laboratory chemicals.
The astronomical value of Chanel No. 5 was generated entirely in the minds of the consumers through the aura of mystery, strategic withdrawal, and the feeling of discovering something hidden.
It's the ultimate proof that you aren't selling the product. You are selling the fantasy attached to the product.
But her story doesn't end there, and this brings us to the final and definitely the most complex phase of her career.
Right. And to understand this final phase, we have to look at the historical context impartially. During World War II, when Germany occupied France, Chanel made the highly controversial decision to remain in Paris.
She lived at the Ritz Hotel, which was the headquarters for the German military.
She took a German intelligence officer as a lover and visibly sided with the occupiers. After the war ended, she was thoroughly and justifiably disgraced in the eyes of the French public.
To avoid prosecution for collaboration, she fled to Switzerland for self-imposed exile. She stays completely out of the fashion game for 14 years.
Most people assumed she was a relic of the past, permanently canceled. But by 1953, she is living in Switzerland, she's 70 years old, and she is watching the new trends coming out of Paris.
And she becomes utterly disgusted by what she sees. Specifically, she is looking at Christian Dior's massive hit, the New Look.
Dior's designs featured heavily corseted, cinched waists, padded hips, and massive heavy skirts that required yards and yards of fabric.
To Chanel, this wasn't fashion. This was a horrifying regression.
It was putting women right back into the restrictive, immobile cages she had spent her entire early life dismantling. The male designers were turning women back into upholstered furniture.
So, driven by sheer contempt for the current trends, she decides to stage a massive comeback at age 70.
Which is an insane risk. Everyone has largely forgotten her as a trendsetter. Her 1954 debut show in Paris is packed, but mostly just out of morbid curiosity.
People want to see the disgraced collaborator fail, and the initial reaction is disastrous. The French press absolutely massacres her.
They call the clothes a sad, pathetic rehash of her 1930s styles. They say she is hopelessly out of touch, locked in a bygone era, and they loudly, aggressively drag up her Nazi associations from the war.
It's the kind of devastating universal panning that would end literally anyone else's career on the spot.
But Chanel remains completely unfazed. Why? Because she understands the deep mechanics of human desire vastly better than the fashion critics do. She realizes that the French market is hostile and blocked to her, so she doesn't fight them.
She simply pivots her strategy entirely toward the United States.
She recognized that American women in the 1950s who were increasingly entering the workforce, who were practical, athletic, and wealthy, were the perfect blank slate for her unfussy, liberating silhouettes.
She gives them the iconic Chanel suit. The boxy, unrestrictive tweed jacket, the knee-length skirt. It allowed a woman to step on a train, go to an office, and look impossibly elegant without suffering.
And the American market goes absolutely wild for it. It becomes the ultimate symbol of modern, sophisticated womanhood, eventually cemented into history when Jacqueline Kennedy adopts it as her uniform.
Once America crowns her the queen of fashion again, the French press eventually has to swallow their pride, backtrack on their reviews, and fall in line.
But the most shocking tactic of this 1950s comeback, and the one that really cements her terrifying understanding of the law of covetousness, is her approach to piracy and intellectual property.
Oh, this is fascinating. In the fashion industry, then and now, designers protect their IP with vicious intensity. If someone makes a knockoff of a Dior dress, Dior sues them into oblivion.
Chanel did the exact opposite. She actually invited wealthy American women to bring their personal seamstresses to her runway shows.
She explicitly allowed them to take photographs, make detailed sketches of her designs, and measure the garments so they could go home and create cheap, unauthorized replicas. Wait, I have to stop you there. Because isn't that just objectively terrible business advice? Encouraging knockoffs. Why would you spend months designing a collection only to willingly give away the intellectual property so someone else can make a cheaper version and steal your sales?
If you are playing a short-term game focused on the profit margin of a single dress, it is terrible advice. But Chanel was playing a much deeper psychological game. For her, at that late stage in her life, it wasn't about the money.
It was about achieving absolute, inescapable ubiquity.
Think about the psychology. If you sue the people copying your dress, you remain exclusive, but your reach is limited. If you encourage the copying, your design floods the market.
She wanted her specific aesthetic, the tweed suit, the quilted bag, the two-tone shoe, to become the default visual setting of the modern world.
It's the difference between selling a product and becoming a paradigm.
Precisely. And from a psychological standpoint, this was the ultimate revenge. The little girl who grew up ignored, impoverished, and unloved in a stark medieval convent engineered a world where millions of women across all classes and continents would spend their lives trying to look exactly like her.
By allowing her designs to be copied and pirated, she transformed herself from an abandoned orphan into the ultimate immortal object of global desire.
It is an unbelievable trajectory. She essentially hacked the human operating system.
She absolutely did.
But her mastery over desire leads to a much deeper, more fundamental question. She clearly weaponized this feeling, but why were people so incredibly susceptible to it in the first place?
Why did wealthy women fall so easily for the cheap jersey fabric and the unlabeled perfume bottles?
Right, why are we so easily manipulated? This transitions us perfectly from the historical narrative of Chanel into the deep biological and evolutionary hardware that makes every single one of us prone to grass is Greener's syndrome.
And this is where the theory gets really fascinating, because it argues that human dissatisfaction is not a modern failing caused by Instagram or capitalism. It is a fundamental, hardwired, ancient aspect of human nature.
To illustrate how deep this goes, we can look at one of the oldest recorded examples of this psychological glitch in human history. The story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt in the Old Testament.
Right. So let's look at the psychology of that story. The Israelites had been enslaved in Egypt for generations. Their lives were defined by brutal, back-breaking labor under the pharaohs.
It was an existence of total subjugation. Moses, acting as the chosen leader, initiates this massive, miraculous escape, leading them out of slavery and into the wilderness toward the Promised Land.
But almost the second they experience the friction and hardships of the desert, the heat, the uncertainty, their memories completely rewrite themselves.
The speed at which they revise history is astonishing. They suddenly become incredibly nostalgic for their time in Egypt.
The narrative details how God performs these massive, undeniable miracles, parting the Red Sea to save them from the Egyptian army, feeding them miraculous manna from heaven, so they literally do not starve in a barren wasteland.
But it is never enough to satisfy them. They actually start complaining and weeping, yearning for what they call the melons, cucumbers, and meats they used to eat while they were literal slaves.
It is profound cognitive dissonance. They are idealizing their past trauma because their present reality requires effort and faith.
They get so bored and restless that they literally melt down their gold to forge a golden calf to worship just for something new to look at.
Once Moses comes down from the mountain and punishes them for it, they get bored of the calf and go right back to griping about the manna.
The complaining is so relentless, so deeply ingrained that God finally becomes so irritated he bars that entire generation, including Moses himself, from ever stepping foot in the Promised Land.
But the true kicker of the story, the real psychological insight, is that even when the next generation finally crosses the Jordan River and settles in the land of milk and honey, achieving the ultimate goal,
The grumbling doesn't stop.
the Promised Land doesn't cure their nature. They just find new things to complain about. They demand a king, they fight amongst themselves. The geography changed, but the internal dissatisfaction remained constant.
And we do the exact same thing today. The human brain is a nostalgia machine that constantly lies to us. We constantly look at other people's lives and assume they have it better.
We think, oh, if I just had her job, I'd be happy.
Or we might be in a perfectly fine loving relationship, but our minds will inevitably wander. Imagining that some stranger we saw at a coffee shop doesn't have any of the annoying flaws or emotional baggage our current partner has.
We nostalgically idealize our own childhoods, remembering the summers we spent playing outside, completely editing out the intense anxieties, the powerlessness, and the insecurities we actually felt as kids.
We do it on a massive societal scale as well. Throughout history, populations become convinced that a violent political revolution or a totally new, untested system of government will instantly usher in a flawless utopia.
They become intoxicated by the fantasy of a clean slate, conveniently ignoring the historical reality that most violent revolutions just result in a new set of tyrants or vastly worse living conditions.
The mind prefers the perfect fantasy of the unknown over the flawed reality of the present.
So why do our brains lie to us like this? The framework we are analyzing breaks down the biological hardware behind this constant gnawing discontent into three distinct pillars. And the first pillar is a cognitive and neurological phenomenon known as induction.
Induction is a fascinating concept. The foundational idea here is that the human mind cannot process a concept without simultaneously bringing its inverse into existence.
Meaning the brain formulates its understanding of the world through contrast.
There's a great visual analogy for this. If you stare intensely at a bright red object, like a red square on a screen, for 60 seconds, and then you look away at a blank white wall, you don't see nothing.
You actually see a glowing green square. Staring at the red intensely forces your visual cortex to hyperactivate the perception of its opposite color, green.
And that visual glitch applies perfectly to our psychology. Every societal no automatically sparks a corresponding psychological yes.
It's the classic cognitive load problem. If I tell you, whatever you do, do not think about a pink elephant, what is the very first image that crashes into your consciousness?
A pink elephant. You cannot negate a thought without first thinking it.
So how does that create desire?
Because if a culture, a religion, or a parent strictly forbids a certain thought, behavior, or object, that very taboo biologically forces the brain to imagine it obsessively. The restriction acts as a spotlight.
A historical example of this is the Victorian era. The Victorians created the most extreme, prudish, restrictive moral regulations regarding sexuality in modern history. You couldn't even show a woman's ankle.
But what was the psychological result of induction? That exact same society, in the shadows, produced one of the most massive, explosive underground pornography and prostitution industries the world had ever seen.
The harder they tried to repress it, the more intensely the collective imagination obsessed over it. You cannot control this vacillation. Your brain is predisposed to obsess over exactly what you're told you cannot have.
Okay, so induction explains why we want the forbidden, but it doesn't quite explain why we are always unhappy, even when we get what we want. Which brings us to the second pillar of human dissatisfaction, our evolutionary lack of complacency.
This requires us to look back at our Pleistocene ancestors living on the African savanna. Evolution is a ruthless editor. It only selects for traits that keep you alive long enough to reproduce.
If our early ancestors had possessed the genetic ability to just sit back under a tree, relax, and feel totally blissfully content with their surroundings,
those genes would have been instantly wiped out of the gene pool.
because they would have been eaten.
Precisely. Survival in a hostile environment required hypervigilance. You had to constantly scan your environment for the negative. You had to look for the hidden predator in the tall grass. You had to worry about the lack of water. You had to anticipate the changing weather.
If you were content, you let your guard down. Complacency was a literal death sentence.
Wait, so are you saying my urge to complain about my perfectly fine Wi-Fi dropping for 10 seconds, or my irritation that the barista got my latte order slightly wrong, is actually a leftover survival instinct from dodging saber-toothed tigers?
In a very real neurobiological sense, yes. We have spent hundreds of thousands of years evolving a brain that is a highly calibrated problem-finding machine. We no longer live in a forest teeming with life-threatening predators, but we are still running that ancient software.
We have a hardwired negative bias. We are biologically designed to scan our perfectly safe, air-conditioned modern environments for problems. Since there are no tigers, the brain latches onto the slow Wi-Fi or the annoying coworker. That survival instinct manifests today as chronic griping, anxiety, and a vague, persistent sense that something is always wrong.
That is incredibly validating, honestly. We aren't broken, we're just terribly optimized for the modern world, but that leads us to the third pillar, which I think is the most mind-blowing part of this entire deep dive, the fMRI reality of human imagination.
Functional magnetic resonance imaging has finally allowed us to see what is actually happening inside the brain's reward centers when we desire something.
This is where we look at the role of dopamine. Popular culture often mischaracterizes dopamine as the pleasure chemical, the thing you get after you eat the cake or win the game.
But neuroscientists know that dopamine is actually the chemical of anticipation. It is released in the ventral tegmental area of the brain when you are pursuing a reward, not when you possess it.
And the fMRI scans show something profound. The electrical and chemical activity in your brain when you vividly imagine achieving a goal or acquiring an object is remarkably, almost identically, similar to the activity of actually doing it.
Let's really emphasize what that means. If you sit on your couch and vividly imagine buying your dream house, your brain floods you with dopamine. You get a neurochemical high just from the fantasy.
Now, compare that to reality. Reality is harsh. Reality is full of friction. To actually buy the house, you have to work a stressful job for 20 years, deal with taxes, fix the leaky roof, and eventually your body ages and breaks down.
Reality is bounded by physics and disappointment.
But imagination has absolutely zero friction. In the theater of your mind, you can conquer the world, you can date a flawless person who never argues with you, and you never have to pay a mortgage.
Therefore, simply dreaming of a better future, imagining that the grass is greener over the next hill, literally gives our brain a stronger, cleaner chemical high than reality often can.
The dopamine spike of the idea of a new partner is often much higher than the reality of actually living with them. It physically feels better to long for things we don't have.
So if you synthesize these three pillars, the brain's reliance on contrast and taboos, which is induction, our evolutionary inability to relax and be content, and the frictionless dopamine high of imagining a better future, you realize that the grass is greener syndrome isn't a moral failing or a character flaw.
It is the fundamental operating system of the human mind. We are creatures built for the chase, not for the capture.
Exactly. And once you accept that this is how the human animal operates, you can stop fighting it and start utilizing it.
Right, which is exactly what we need to get into now. We have the historical blueprint from Chanel's life, and we understand the deep neurobiological hardware that makes everyone crave the unknown. But how do we practically apply this?
If you are a creator, an entrepreneur, or just someone trying to navigate human relationships, how do you use these biological glitches to make yourself or your work deeply desirable?
The framework outlines 3 highly actionable strategies for stimulating desire. Strategy number 1, know how and when to withdraw.
This is perhaps the most counterintuitive and difficult strategy for modern people to master,
Yeah.
largely because it requires overriding our instinct to seek immediate validation.
The strategy dictates that you must maintain a touch of coldness or a slight emotional blankness in your presence. Wait, isn't that just being manipulative and toxic? If you're cold and aloof with your friends or your partner, isn't that just a recipe for creating incredibly unhealthy, avoidant relationships? How is that sustainable?
It's a crucial distinction. It is not about being cruel, abusive, or genuinely neglectful. It's about emotional regulation and not overexposing yourself.
If you are entirely 100% readable at all times, if people can easily map out your every emotion and figure you out in 5 minutes, or if you show your desperate need for their approval too visibly, they will unconsciously begin to take you for granted.
The human brain quickly categorizes you as solved, and once a puzzle is solved, the brain moves on. Over time, they will completely lose interest because there is no friction, no mystery left to engage their imagination.
It's about signaling autonomy. It's signaling that you don't desperately need the other person to survive. That subtle touch of coldness unconsciously heightens your value in their eyes because humans inherently value things that are hard to grasp.
It forces the other person into the position of the pursuer. Think about how classic Golden Age movie stars operated. The Greta Garbos, the Cary Grants.
They didn't tweet every thought they had. They maintained a level of blankness and ambiguity about their true opinions, their politics, and their private lives.
They turned themselves into blank screens so that the public was forced to project their own desires onto them. The most extreme modern example of mastering this strategy is Michael Jackson.
During his peak in the 1980s, he played this game of strategic withdrawal to absolute perfection. He was terrified of oversaturating the market and becoming mundane.
So he would space out his album releases by 3, 4, 5 years. He starved the public of his presence, so that when he finally did release something, the market was ravenous for it.
He also aggressively managed his public image to maintain ambiguity. He almost never gave standard interviews explaining the meaning of his lyrics. He refused to give the audience a definitive interpretation of who he was.
And he actively weaponized induction. He would occasionally have his own publicists leak incredibly bizarre, unconfirmed stories to the press.
Like the famous rumor that he slept in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber to halt the aging process, or that he was trying to buy the bones of the Elephant Man.
The genius of this tactic was that he would never confirm or deny the stories. He just planted a seed of absolute weirdness and let the public's imagination do all the heavy lifting. By remaining withdrawn and silent, he became a mythological figure rather than a regular pop star.
And this strategy applies to the art or the products you create as well, not just your personal brand. Look at the most legendary dramatists and writers, William Shakespeare or Anton Chekhov.
Why do their plays still feel fresh and relevant centuries later, while thousands of other playwrights from their eras are completely forgotten? Because they left the presentation open-ended.
They described human nature, human flaws, and tragic situations without ever explicitly judging the characters. They didn't hit the audience over the head with a definitive moral lesson.
Because the core of the work is ambiguous. Because the author's true stance is withdrawn, every new generation projects their own contemporary anxieties and meanings onto the text.
It's like giving a kid a cardboard box instead of a highly structured, complex board game. If you give a kid a game with strict rules, explicit instructions, and a defined endpoint, they play it, they solve it, and they get bored of it in 10 minutes.
But a cardboard box is ambiguous. It can be a spaceship, a medieval castle, or a submarine. The imagination goes wild because it isn't restricted by a defined set of rules, and that ambiguity sustains their interest infinitely longer. You want to be the cardboard box.
A perfect analogy. You offer the structure, but leave the meaning blank. Which brings us to strategy 2. Create rivalries of desire.
To understand this, we have to accept that desire is almost never an isolated individual phenomenon. It is deeply, fundamentally social. We do not desire things in a vacuum.
And again, this is rooted in our early childhood biology. As infants and toddlers, we view our parents' attention and resources as a strict zero-sum game. If our sibling is being held or played with, our primitive brain registers that as a threat to our survival because it means we are getting less attention.
So we learn, very early on, to fiercely compete for affection and objects.
Anyone who has ever been a parent or babysat multiple kids has seen this exact mechanism play out. A kid will completely ignore a specific toy truck for 3 straight days. They have zero interest in it.
But the exact second their sibling picks up that truck and starts playing with it, suddenly that specific toy is the single most valuable, urgently needed object in the universe.
Blood will be shed over this truck. We are biologically wired to want what other people want.
It's a phenomenon philosophers call mimetic desire. We mimic the desires of others to signal our own value. And the inverse is also true. If an object, a piece of art, or a person is clearly not desired by anyone else, we instinctively view it with distaste.
We assume there must be something inherently wrong or defective with it if the herd has rejected it. This childhood pattern completely dictates our adult lives, from the stock market to the dating pool.
So how do you practically apply mimetic desire? You must ensure that your work, your product, or you yourself appear to be heavily desired by others at all times.
If you are negotiating a job offer or a contract, you never ever negotiate in a vacuum. You must always find a way to subtly hint at a third party who is aggressively vying for your services. You want to allow rumors to spread about your popularity.
It is about creating the illusion of a crowd. Even if the crowd is initially angry, it serves a purpose. It is a very cynical but highly accurate sociological truth. Even negative controversy is vastly superior to silence.
Negative comments, outrage, and debate give your object a provocative edge. It signals to the broader public that this thing is worth paying attention to. Humans are naturally drawn to the heat of the negative.
This connects directly back to Chanel's piracy tactic in the 1950s. By letting people copy her designs and flood the streets with unauthorized knockoffs, she ensured her clothes were seen everywhere. She created a massive, visible crowd.
People saw other women wearing the tweed suit, that childhood sibling rivalry kicked in, and they felt a desperate, mimetic need to participate so they wouldn't be left out of the social hierarchy. It's manufactured virality.
All right, strategy 3. Use induction, or the appeal of the illicit.
We discussed the biology of induction earlier, the fact that forbidding something forces the brain to imagine it. Now we look at how to weaponize it.
We live under the illusion that we are entirely free, but the reality is that modern humans live in an incredibly regulated, digitally tracked, hyper-constrained world.
There are more laws, social norms, algorithms, and HR constraints governing our daily behavior now than at any point in human history.
Because of this intense, invisible regulation, people secretly, desperately yearn for what is transgressive, They possess a deep urge to step out of bounds, just to prove they still can.
So, to make something desirable, you have to associate whatever you are doing with something slightly illicit, unconventional, or rebellious. The historical example often cited here is John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign.
JFK brilliantly contrasted his youthful, slightly dangerous, glamorous image against the stultifying, incredibly conformist, gray era of the 1950s under Dwight Eisenhower.
Voting for JFK wasn't just a pragmatic political choice about tax policy. He successfully tapped into the taboo, almost Oedipal desire of the younger generation to overthrow the stodgy, restrictive father figure of the previous generation.
Another universally powerful illicit desire is voyeurism. Peeking into the private lives of others violates strict, ancient social taboos about privacy, yet practically everyone feels the magnetic pull to see what happens behind closed doors.
You can incorporate this into your work by framing your content, your product, or your persona as a revelation of deep secrets. You give your audience the impression that you are sneaking them past the velvet rope, showing them behind-the-scenes realities or forbidden knowledge that they aren't supposed to have access to.
But the ultimate illusion you can offer, the absolute strongest application of induction, is dangling the impossible. As we established, reality is full of friction.
It takes decades of compounding interest to build wealth. You cannot reverse the cellular process of aging, and you definitely can't cheat death.
But if you offer a product, a philosophy, or a persona that promises a magic shortcut, the fantasy of overnight wealth, the secret to recovering your youth, a total transformation of your character in 30 days, people will grasp at it with terrifying greed.
Because of the dopamine loop we discussed. Just imagining that these impossible shortcuts are real gives them that fMRI chemical high. They are paying for the feeling of anticipation.
Right. And looking at the modern landscape, isn't this basically the exact blueprint for every modern snake oil salesman, extreme biohacking wellness guru, or crypto bro selling a $5,000 online course?
They aren't selling a functional product. They're literally selling the impossible shortcut to people who are desperate to escape the friction of reality.
That is exactly what they are doing. It is the identical blueprint. And to be clear, understanding these mechanics isn't about giving you a license to become a manipulative snake oil salesman.
It's about defense. It is vital for you to understand these mechanics so you can recognize when they are being used against you.
When you find your brain suddenly obsessing over a miracle supplement that promises to cure all inflammation, or an investment scheme that promises 100% returns with no risk, you need to be able to step back and realize, I am being hacked. My biological software is being exploited by the law of covetousness. Which brings us to a really crucial question. If these rules of desire withdrawal, rivalry, the illicit, are so incredibly effective and so deeply hardwired into our evolutionary biology, why are modern people so remarkably terrible at applying them?
When we look at the absolute mastery of someone like Coco Chanel or Michael Jackson and contrast it with the current cultural climate, there is a massive glaring disconnect. People today seem entirely incapable of cultivating mystery.
And that failure is a direct result of the environment we've built. We are currently living in what sociologists would diagnose as a saturated society.
We are constantly aggressively bombarded. Advertisers blanket every inch of our digital and physical space, shouting at us, demanding we click, subscribe, and buy immediately.
Politicians bludgeon us over the head, exploiting our base fears and our negative bias, but completely failing to offer any subtle, inspiring, or complex imagination of the future.
It's just a wall of noise, and this relentless, aggressive bombardment has a hardening effect on the human imagination.
Because we are never given the space or the silence to wonder about anything, our capacity for fantasy is being systematically crushed. We are overfed but malnourished.
Exactly. And this cultural saturation spills over directly into how we handle our personal relationships, creating a dynamic that is utterly destructive to desire. It creates the trap of the true self.
Today, there is this pervasive, deeply held belief that people should desire us just for who we are in all our unfiltered, mundane reality.
Yes. You see this constantly in modern dating. People go on a first date, and because they've been told that vulnerability and authenticity are the highest virtues, they feel compelled to radically overshare within the first hour.
They dump all their childhood traumas, their highly specific likes and dislikes, their dietary restrictions, and their boring daily routines right onto the table immediately.
They want to be entirely transparent, believing that this honesty will forge a deep connection.
But psychologically, what they are actually doing is leaving absolutely zero room for the other person to use their imagination. They deny the other person the pleasure of fantasy.
They present a fully solved, incredibly dense puzzle. And when the other person inevitably loses interest, because there's no mystery left to pursue, no blank space to project onto, the overshare goes online and writes long, angry posts complaining about the superficiality of modern dating, blaming the other person for not appreciating their truth.
The argument here is incredibly provocative. It suggests that this modern trend of radical honesty, the obsession with living your truth and posting photo dumps of you crying on the internet, isn't actually driven by some high moral calling or advanced emotional intelligence.
It's driven by pure laziness and profound self-absorption.
It is a devastating critique, but a highly accurate one. Think about the energy required to master covetousness. It takes immense psychological effort and discipline to step outside of your own ego, to view yourself objectively from the outside, and to strategically imagine what other people need to project onto you.
It takes massive self-control to hold back your opinions, to remain silent, to cultivate ambiguity. Conversely, it requires absolutely zero effort to just vomit your unedited thoughts, anxieties, and feelings onto everyone you meet.
We have dressed up our lack of emotional discipline as authenticity. But the inevitable result is that our impact on other people becomes entirely paper thin.
I love the analogy of a movie set to explain this. Imagine you pay for a ticket and go to the theater to see a magical, highly immersive sci-fi film. You want to be transported.
But instead of showing you the finished movie, the director walks out and insists on showing you the boom mic hovering over the actors, the frantic script revisions, the craft services table where the extras are eating stale donuts, and the raw green screen before the special effects are added.
They show you the entire chaotic, mundane process, demanding that you appreciate the authentic reality of filmmaking.
How would you react?
You'd be furious. You wouldn't feel magic. You would just feel bored and cheated. You didn't pay for the reality. You paid for the illusion.
In our personal lives, by constantly oversharing and demanding to be loved for our unfiltered selves, we're basically showing everyone the boom mic and the green screen of our personality, and then getting furious when they aren't mesmerized by the movie.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the problem. If you want to be magnetic, you must go in the opposite direction of this modern moralism.
Because so few people understand the art of strategic mystery anymore. Because everyone else is shouting their every thought into the void, the field is wide open.
The power belongs entirely to anyone who is willing to put in the disciplined effort to curate their presence and cultivate desirability.
So we spent this entire deep dive deconstructing how to exploit the biological glitches of others. We've learned how to build the illusion, how to withdraw, and how to use the power of the forbidden.
But there is a massive lingering question here. How do we avoid falling victim to our own biological hardwiring? If our brains are constantly lying to us, pumping us full of dopamine for fantasies that will never satisfy us, how do we escape the trap of constant dissatisfaction ourselves?
It is the ultimate philosophical dilemma of this framework. Because if you live your entire life purely as a manipulator of covetousness, constantly manufacturing illusions and chasing the next hit of external validation, you will end up profoundly exhausted, paranoid, and miserable.
You will become a prisoner of your own game. To escape this, we have to make a crucial distinction between positive covetousness and negative covetousness.
Right, because not all desire is bad. Positive restlessness is essential to the human experience. It is the engine of progress. It's the feeling that keeps us young, that drives scientific innovation, that pushes artists to create better work, and that prevents us from falling into total physical and mental stagnation as we age.
We need a certain amount of friction to feel alive.
But negative restlessness is a chronic, low-level, corrosive discontent that slowly ruins your life. It is the impulse that makes you constantly job hop every 2 years because of a vague, undefined sense of boredom, causing you to throw away the equity, the deep skills, and the network you've built.
It's the biological glitch that makes you swipe endlessly on dating apps, discarding perfectly good, loving, complex partners because you are addicted to the dopamine hit of a new match, perpetually searching for a flawless, conflict-free human being who simply does not exist outside of your imagination.
So what is the root cause of this negative restlessness? Why do we fall into that specific trap?
The core problem is our locus of attention. We have a fatal tendency to absorb ourselves in what is most distant rather than what is nearest.
We convince ourselves that the solution to our internal void is geographical or external. We think, if I just quit my job and move to a beach in Bali, I'll finally be at peace.
But the brutal reality is that if you run away to an exotic place without changing your internal state, you are merely dragging your own discontented, problem-finding Pleistocene brain to a new zip code.
You will find things to complain about on the beach. You cannot escape yourself. Similarly, spending hours reading endless online speculations about the lives of celebrities or the distant future just stirs up chimeras phantoms that keep your mind in a state of constant, useless, agitated turmoil.
So what is the antidote? How do you rewire the dopamine loop?
The antidote is to radically shift your focus. The ultimate goal is to absorb your mind entirely in reality. Instead of chasing distant ghosts and abstract fantasies, you must learn to focus deeply, intensely on the people and the environment that are already in your immediate circle.
Which sounds boring to a brain addicted to novelty.
It sounds boring until you actually try it.
Yeah.
Because even the people you think you know perfectly, your partner of 10 years, your oldest friend, have incredibly deep, mysterious corners of their psychology that you will never fully understand if you actually take the time to pay attention.
There is infinite complexity in the familiar if you look closely enough. Immerse yourself in the deep, complex history and the mechanics of the physical environment where you already live.
And most importantly, take the terrifying step of turning that analytical lens inward. Take charge of your own nature rather than remaining a blind slave to your evolutionary glitches.
The supreme desire, then, the final evolution of this entire mindset, isn't about perpetually chasing illusions. It isn't about winning the rat race of mimetic desire. It is about coveting a deeper, more profound, friction-filled relationship with reality itself.
That is where true calmness, unshakable focus, and practical power actually lie. You master the illusion so you can navigate the world, but you anchor your own mind in the undeniable, messy truth of the present moment.
That is the only sustainable way to wield this kind of power.
That is a profound place to land. Let's do a quick recap of the massive psychological and historical journey we've just been on.
We started in the austere, sensory-deprived walls of a French convent, watching a young orphan invent the modern mechanics of covetousness through romance novels.
We tracked her rise to global dominance by weaponizing transgression, jersey fabric, and the abstract mystery of Chanel No. 5.
We explored the deep neuroscience and evolutionary biology of complaining, realizing that our brains give us a literal chemical high for imagining things we don't have.
We learned that generating desire isn't about aggressively pushing your product or your personality onto people. It's about the thrill of the chase, the power of strategic absence, and offering people a blank screen for their own fantasies.
And we confronted the highly uncomfortable reality that our modern cultural obsession with unfiltered, constant authenticity might actually be making us profoundly lazy and uninteresting.
To bring this all home and to leave you with something to really chew on, there is a brilliantly provocative, wonderfully cynical quote from the 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer that perfectly encapsulates the power of strategic withdrawal.
He wrote, "It is advisable to let every one of your acquaintance, whether man or woman, feel now and then that you could very well dispense with their company. A dog will not bear being treated too kindly, let alone a man."
A stark, somewhat brutal reminder that humans value what they fear losing.
So, as you go about your day, look around your life. Look at the objects you desperately want to buy right now, the specific people whose attention you are currently craving, the career moves you are agonizing over.
Are the things you want truly things you need to survive and thrive? Or are you just operating on an ancient biological glitch, falling under the spell of someone else's carefully constructed mystery?
Next time you find yourself deeply, painfully coveting something, stop, take a breath, and ask yourself, is the grass actually greener? Or am I just staring at a highly engineered optical illusion? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Until next time.